The kitchen smelled like coffee and toast and the specific warmth of a house that had been a home for a long time. James Martin sat at the head of the table in his reading glasses and a soft gray sweater, newspaper open, completely at peace. A second mug sat across from him, still steaming, made without being asked, 2 sugars, a little more milk than most people would think. For the man he had known for 11 days and already trusted with the thing he loved most. Down the hall, behind a studio door that was never quite closed, Zaya's music was low, and she was singing along to something badly and without a single apology about it. Her laugh came through every few minutes, at nothing, at everything, at whatever her own mind threw at her. And every time it did, James smiled at his newspaper without looking up. Kai sat with both hands around his mug and said nothing. 11 days in this house, 11 mornings at this table, 11 times he had listened to that laugh come down the hall and watched this man read his newspaper and told himself this was exactly where he was supposed to be. He was still telling himself. On his corkboard back home, the one he had returned to once in those 11 days, stood in front of for 40 minutes, then driven back here. James Martin's face sat at the center of 19 years of red string. At this table, James Martin's was passing him the butter without being asked, because he had noticed on day 3 that Kai always reached for it. Welcome back, Obsession family. If you were here for part 1, you spent this whole week with one question. Does he say yes? Does he walk into that house knowing exactly what he plans to do to the people inside it? You're looking at your answer right now. He said yes. He is sitting at their table, drinking their coffee, and listening to her laugh come down the hall. And he has not yet found a single reason strong enough to stop what he came here to do. This is the channel where Black women are chosen. Where a man who spent 19 years building walls meets a woman who has never once respected a wall in her life, and loses. Subscribe right now and hit that notification bell if you haven't, because part 2 is the most devastating thing we have written yet. And we are not going to waste a single second of it. Now, let's go back to where it started. Back to the door. 3 days after the ceremony, his phone rang. James Martin's security liaison. A threat had emerged, connected to a business rival. James wanted his daughter protected. Someone capable, vetted, and available immediately. The only recently certified candidate who fit every criteria was Kai. He stood at the corkboard with the phone in his hand and thought about her face in that ballroom. How she had turned to find him. How open she was. How she wanted him to see her father and simply be happy about it. He thought about 19 years. Then he closed his eyes, opened them, and drove to her studio. She answered the door in paint-stained dungarees and an oversized cream jumper, hair in a messy knot held by a pencil. Cerulean blue on her left wrist. Different color from the last time, same wrist. She looked at him the way you look at something you are not expecting and aren't sure yet whether you're glad about. You walked out, she said. Miss Martin's, do not. Quiet. Final. Do not call me that. He told her about the assignment. She stood with her arms crossed and listened to all of it without a word. When he finished, she said nothing for a moment. Not soft, not angry. Something more complicated than either. My father arranged this. Yes, he answered. Without asking me. Yes. Of course he did. She looked at Kai for a long moment. Are you going to explain why you walked out of that ceremony? No. Are you planning to explain it at some point? A pause that went one beat too long. No, he said. She held his gaze. Something moved behind her eyes that she did not share. Then she reached up, pulled the pencil from her hair, and let the whole knot fall loose around her shoulders. She stepped back and opened the door wider. You'd better come in then, Tiger. His jaw tightened once. He stepped inside. James met him in the front hall with both hands extended. Not one, both. He took Kai's hand in his and held it with the easy warmth of a man who had no performance in him, whose welcome was simply real. "Zaya told me what you did for her during the program," he said, "that you looked after her, that you covered for her when she made a mess of things." A small, genuine laugh. "Trust me, you have no idea what it means to a father to hear that." "She worked for everything she achieved," Kai said. "She did. She always does." James glanced across the kitchen to where Zaya was standing at the counter pretending not to be listening, fooling absolutely no one. Something moved in his face. Quiet and enormous. In the look of a man who was running out of time to look at the things he loved most and knew it. "She is everything," he said simply. "I just need her to be safe." He went to put the kettle on. Zaya materialized at Kai's shoulder immediately. "He's going to make you tea," she said under her breath, London accent low and warm. "It's his whole personality. Do not fight it." I wasn't going to fight it. Good. Last person who said no, he brought it up for 3 weeks. 3 weeks, Tiger. The man holds a grudge about tea. She tilted her head up at him, eyes doing that reading thing. "Are you going to tell me eventually what happened at the ceremony?" "No." "Right." She held his gaze one moment longer. "We'll play it your way. For now." She walked back to the counter. He understood very clearly that she meant none of that last part. The house became its own world. James on the veranda with his newspaper. Zaya's music from behind the studio door at hours that had no reasonable explanation. Thursday dinners, which James was prouder of than almost anything else in his life, and which Kai ate in full every week because James watched him with the specific attentiveness of a man who wanted to know whether his cooking was landing. "Well," James said, the first Thursday, before Kai had swallowed. "It's good." "Which part?" "All of it." James sat back with the expression of a man who had just been given a significant compliment and was trying to act like he wasn't. Zaya, across the table, was already on her second helping and watching Kai from the corner of her eye with that small knowing look she kept trying to hide and never quite managed. "Victor called every Sunday at 8. Have you found anything?" "Not yet." "Be patient." Victor's voice was warm and settled. The voice that had been the one steady thing in Kai's life since the night everything else changed shape. "You are exactly where you need to be." Kai stood at his bedroom window, looking at the garden. James's reading chair on the veranda below. "I've been through his professional history, his financials, everything accessible." "And?" "Nothing." He kept his voice even. "Nothing that connects him to that night." A pause. "Kai, the connection exists. I was there. I know what I know." "You told me you weren't there. You told me you were told afterward." "I know what I know," Victor said again, the gentleness in his voice not moving a single inch, the certainty underneath it equally immovable. "Be patient. Keep looking." Kai hung up. Down the hall, Zaya's music started. Low London bass, the sound of her other life, and he stood at the window and looked at James Martin's empty chair on the veranda, and felt the doubt settle into something he could not entirely put away. He did not examine it. He went back to work. She did not make it easy for him. This was not strategy. Zaya Martin simply felt things completely and did not have a gear for pretending otherwise. She had decided, somewhere between the ceremony and his arrival at her door, that she was not going to act like the last 3 weeks of the program hadn't happened. She had kissed him back in that storage room. She had kissed him back on that obstacle course. She was not going to now sit politely on one side of a house while he sat on the other and they both performed indifference. So she didn't. She put her feet in his lap on the living room couch because her feet were cold and he was on the warm end. She appeared in the kitchen every morning and stole whatever he was making without asking, and ate it in front of him while he stood there deciding whether to say something about it. She talked through the studio door when she heard him in the hall, knowing full well he was there because she could hear him not making noise. The specific silence of someone choosing to stand still. Tiger. Yes. Be honest with me. Is this blue wrong, or am I just tired? He pushed the studio door open, walked to the canvas, looked at it. The blue is right. The composition beneath it isn't. She stared at the canvas, then at him. How did you see that? You've been painting over the same section for 3 days. You're fixing the wrong problem. She put her brush down and looked at it for a long moment. I hate that you're right. I know. You don't have to look so calm about it. I'm always calm. That's the problem. She picked up the brush again. He went back to his chair. She waited until he was settled. Tiger. Zaya. Are you actually reading that book, or are you just holding it? The slightest pause. Reading it. What page are you on? He didn't answer. She turned around. He was looking at the page he had been on for 20 minutes. She pressed her lips together to keep the smile from becoming a sound and went back to the canvas. 3 days later, she sat cross-legged on the studio floor while he stood in the doorway reviewing a security contact list, and she talked about a piece she was working on. A new commission, large canvas, a figure in a corridor between 2 doors. And halfway through explaining it, she noticed he had put the contact list down entirely and was just listening. What? She said. Nothing. Keep going. You put the list down. I can listen and review simultaneously. You put it all the way down, Tiger. On the floor. He looked at the list on the floor. He picked it back up. She smiled at the canvas. The figure, he said after a moment. In the corridor. Which door does she choose? That's what I'm trying to decide. What happens behind each one? She thought about it. One is familiar. Everything she knows. Everything comfortable. The other one is different. She doesn't know what's behind it. Just that it's there and it's been calling to her, and she's been standing in that corridor for a very long time, trying to work out whether the familiar thing is actually what she wants or just what she's used to. Silence. She should open the second door, he said. Should she? Yes. Why? He looked at the canvas. Because she's already in the corridor. If she was going to stay with the familiar thing, she would never have opened the first door to begin with. She turned around on the floor and looked up at him. He was looking at the canvas with the direct attention of someone who has forgotten he was supposed to be somewhere else. She watched his face. You're very interesting, she said quietly. He looked down at her. You say that like it's a problem. It is. A bit. She tilted her head. You know what your problem is, Tiger? I'm sure you're about to tell me. You give yourself away in the questions you ask. You act like you're behind glass. Contained, professional, completely unreadable. And then you ask one question and the whole picture falls out. She smiled. You asked what happens behind the doors, not which one is safer. Not which one leads where. What happens? That's not a security officer's question. He was quiet. Come sit down, she said. Stop standing in the doorway like you're about to leave. He sat on the floor, across from her. She handed him her sketchbook and said, Show me what you see. And he looked at her for a moment, like she had asked him something in a language he had not been asked to speak in a very long time. And then, he took the sketchbook and looked at the canvas and said, She looks like someone who has already made the decision and is just waiting for permission. She stared at him. Yes, she said. Exactly that. She was wearing him down and they both knew it. One afternoon she sent her assistant home early. Kai was in the armchair by the studio window with a document on his lap when he heard the front door close. Then Zaya's footsteps. Then the sound of the studio door being locked. Slowly, deliberately, the sound of a decision being made without any pretense about what the decision was. He looked up. She crossed the room and stood in front of him. She looked down at him with those eyes that had never once in his entire experience of them offered him a way out, and she held out her hand. "Put that down," she said. "Zaya. Put it down." He put the document down. She caught his hand and pulled him to his feet. He was taller than her by almost a foot, and he looked down at her, and she looked up at him. And the silence in the room was the specific kind that only exists between two people who both know what is about to happen and are both, for different reasons, choosing it anyway. "You have been fighting this for weeks," she said. "I have reasons for fighting it." "I know you do. I don't care about your reasons." She stepped closer. "You care about me." "That is not the point." "That is entirely the point." Another step. "I am not asking you to stop caring about your reasons, and I'm asking you to stop pretending you don't feel what you feel." "Zaya." His voice had dropped lower than he intended. "You need to—" "What? Stop? Go back to my side of the room?" She tilted her head. "Tiger, I have watched you hold yourself like a closed fist for weeks, and every single time I get close, I can feel you wanting to open." Her hand went flat against his chest. His heart gave him away completely. "There it is," she said softly. Something in him simply gave up the fight. His hands found her face and he kissed her with the specific relief of a man who has been holding something back for so long that letting go of it feels less like a choice and more like a physical necessity. She laughed against his mouth, warm and entirely pleased with herself, and he growled softly and pulled her closer, and she wrapped her arms around his neck, and the document slid off the chair to the floor, and neither of them noticed. What happened in that studio after the door was locked, no one was owed the details of. Only that when James knocked at 6 to ask about dinner, Zaya called back cheerfully that they'd be out in 20 minutes, and Kai sat on the studio floor afterward with his back against the wall, looking at the ceiling, with the expression of a man who had just done something entirely wonderful and entirely terrible at the same time, and could not yet tell which one was going to be louder. If you are watching this and feeling it, let us know with a like right now. Because you need to understand what is happening here. She is giving him everything, all of herself, completely, without reservation. And he is sitting on that studio floor knowing what he has on his corkboard, knowing what he is building, knowing what it will cost her when the floor falls out. Stay with us, because the most beautiful part and the worst part are about to run at exactly the same time. James walked in on them once. Not touching. Close in the way of two people who had been, standing near the window, her head just below his chin, his hand near her shoulder, but not on it. James came in for something and stopped in the doorway. He looked at them. He said nothing. But his face did something before he could rearrange it. Deep, quiet satisfaction. The expression of a man who had been hoping for something without saying so, and has just watched it walk through his front door. That evening, while Zaya was helping clear the dinner plates, James kept his voice casual. "I like that young man." Zaya set down a plate. "Appa." "I'm just making an observation." "Make a different one." "He's careful, he's good. He watches you like, do not finish that sentence." James smiled the wide, warm smile, the one that took up his whole face, and stacked the plates and said nothing more. But later, while Kai was at the sink washing up, James came and stood beside him and picked up the drying cloth without a word, and they worked through it quietly. And once, after a while, James said, "Whatever happened before you came here, whatever it is you're carrying, I don't know what it is." He dried a bowl slowly. "But I'm glad you're here." Kai passed him a glass. "She's had a difficult few years," James continued. "Her mother. Then worrying about me, even though she thinks I don't know she does it. A pause. She lets people in at the surface very easily. Real close. The kind that stays. That's a different thing. That's rare for her. He set the glass down. She lets you close. Kai turned off the tap. Yes, he said. I know. James looked at him. Something in the look said, good. I hoped so. He folded the cloth, said goodnight, and went upstairs. Kai stood at the sink alone and put both hands on the edge of it and stared at the drain. The gallery opening was on a Thursday. Kai had swept the venue. He had found nothing. The threat arrived 40 minutes in. A man at the edge of the crowd with his hand at his jacket, moving through people with the focus of someone who had a destination and not much patience for anything between him and it. Kai had him in 4 seconds, eating between the man and Zaya in less than 3 more. He disarmed, controlled, restrained in under 10 seconds, and the room erupted around them. He turned around. She was against the wall, not crying, looking at him with something raw in her face. Rawer than fear, rawer than shock. The expression of someone whose understanding of another person has just rearranged itself entirely. He crossed to her. He cupped her face in both hands and checked her. Eyes, color, breathing. Clinical, efficient, not succeeding at only that. She put her hands over his. I'm okay, she said. I know. Kai, softly. His name. She rarely used his actual name. I'm okay. He stood there with her face in his hands for 1 more second. Then he stepped back and went to deal with the aftermath. And he did not look at her again for several minutes because he did not trust his face. In the car going home he drove and she sat in the back, and Seoul moved past them in streams of light. 12 minutes of silence. Tiger. Yes. Thank you. He said nothing. His hands on the wheel gripped once, tighter, then released. Another minute passed. You moved before you thought about it, she said. Didn't you? A pause. It's training. It wasn't training. I was watching you. You were across the room. You saw him before anyone else did, and you were just there. Between us. Before any of it finished happening. He kept his eyes on the road. Tiger. Yes. That's not something you do for an assignment. Quiet. No accusation in it. Just the sound of someone saying a true thing out loud. He said nothing. The city went past. Bright and indifferent and entirely unaware of the 2 people in the car who were both sitting with something they weren't going to name yet. James started leaving things. Notes folded inside Zaya's favorite book. Photographs in new frames in new places around the house. A small painting she had made at 8 years old, cleaned and hung in the hallway without announcement. He moved more slowly in the mornings. A cough, quiet, that he excused himself for. Kai filed it. He told himself he was not watching. He filed it anyway. One night, late, just the 2 of them on the veranda after Zaya had gone to bed, James sat with his tea and looked out at the city for a long while before he spoke. I know I'm running out of road. Just like that. No preamble, no softening. Kai went very still. I try not to think about it most days, James continued. There's enough to fill the days if you let there be. But some nights? He looked at the lights. Some nights it's harder. How long have you known? Kai asked. 2 years. A pause. I haven't told Zaya. I will. I've been trying to find the right time, and there's no right time for something like that. So I keep looking. He turned his tea in his hands. I just need her to be okay when I'm not here. That's all I want. That she has someone. That she's not alone. Kai looked at the city. She's stronger than she knows, he said. She is. She got that from her mother. James smiled. But even the strongest people need someone to come home to. He stood slowly. Get some sleep, son. He went inside. Kai sat on the veranda in the dark and did not move for a very long time. She found him past midnight in the corridor outside her studio. The light was on underneath the door. He knocked quietly. She said, "Come in." She was on the couch with a blanket and her sketchbook and a mug long gone cold, and she looked at him when he came in with the look of someone who had been waiting for something to arrive and was not entirely surprised it was him. He sat on the far end. She put her feet in his lap, cold as always, and he put his hand around her ankle, the way you hold something you've stopped thinking of as a choice. They sat in the quiet. "Can't sleep?" she said. "No." "What are you thinking about?" A long pause. "Nothing." "Tiger. We've been in the same house for weeks. I know what your nothing looks like. And this isn't it." He was quiet. "You don't have to tell me," she said. "I'm not asking you to." "I know." More quiet. She turned a page in the sketchbook without drawing anything. Outside, Seoul was low and constant and awake at every hour. "Tell me something true," she said eventually. "About you. You know everything about me. I don't know anything real. You know things about me. I know your tells. I know you take longer routes. I know you go still when something matters. I know you hold the wall when you're losing a fight with yourself." She looked at him sideways. "That's not the same as knowing you." He looked at the window, at the dark beyond it. Then she said, "My mother died when I was 22. Not at him. At the ceiling. And the way you say something you've been carrying so long that saying it out loud is less a choice and more a release. Cancer. Almost 2 years of the hard part. I was there for all of it. I chose to be there, and I don't regret it." She pulled her knees to her chest. "But I know what it looks like. From the inside. I know the cough. I know what it looks like when someone is losing weight and explaining it away." Her voice stayed level, but only just. "I know what my father isn't telling me." Kai was completely still. "I haven't said that to anyone," she said. "Not one person. I've been carrying it alone because saying it out loud makes it more real than I can handle right now." She looked at him. Her eyes were bright but dry. "I don't know why I'm telling you, except I think you'd actually hear it. Not fix it. Not tell me I'm worrying unnecessarily. Just hear it." "I hear it," he said. She let out a slow breath. Something in her shoulders settled. "It's terrifying," she said quietly. "Loving someone and watching them not be honest with you about the thing you're most afraid of. Knowing they're doing it because they love you and think it will protect you." She looked at her hands. "It doesn't protect you. It just means you're scared alone." "No," he said. "It doesn't." She looked at him. "What were your parents like? You said your father fixed things." "He did. Anything broken in the neighborhood, people brought it to him. He never turned anyone away." A pause. "He used to say that a broken thing was just a thing that hadn't found the right hands yet." She was very still, not filling the space with comfort, just staying in it. "And your mother?" She laughed at everything, genuinely. Not for politeness. The neighbors used to say you could tell what she actually found funny and what she was just being polite about. The corner of his mouth moved, barely. "She was very bad at being polite. I would have liked her. She would have liked you, enormously. She had no patience for people who perform themselves. She would have found you—" He stopped. "Found me what?" He looked at her. "Exactly right," he said quietly. Something moved in her face. She reached across and covered his hands with both of hers. She didn't say anything else. She didn't need to. She just held his hands over his grief and stayed there with him, and he looked at her, completely open, not protecting herself, just present and real and entirely his, and felt something he had been holding at a specific distance get past the distance entirely. He pressed his mouth to the top of her head. Just briefly. She went very still. "Get some sleep," he said quietly. "I'm not going anywhere." She fell asleep on the couch. He covered her with the blanket from the back of it. He went to his room and lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling, and thought about what he was doing. Not the mission, not the plan. What he was actually doing. To this woman who had just handed him her most hidden fear and the grief underneath it, and expected nothing from him except to receive it. He lay there until the sun came up. He did not sleep. Victor called Sunday. "Have you found anything?" Kai was at the window. Downstairs. James and Zaya were in the middle of what had become their ritual argument about whether Sunday breakfast should be pancakes or eggs. Zaya was winning comprehensively, and James was pretending to be wounded about it. "I've found nothing," Kai said. "Uncle, I have been in this house for 2 months. I have been through everything accessible. There is no connection between James Martins and the night my parents died that holds up." A pause. "Kai, I'm not saying it isn't there. I'm saying I can't find it. And the more time I spend here, the more I—" He stopped. "The more you— what?" Victor's voice was careful now. "Nothing." Kai. Gentle. The gentleness of a man who had been the most constant presence in his life for 19 years. "I know what this is. You've been inside this family for weeks. You've started to feel things. That's human. That's allowed. But don't let what you feel make you doubt what you know. I know what you told me. Then trust it. You are so close. Don't step back now." Downstairs, Zaya's laugh erupted, full and bright, and taking up all the air in the room the way it always did. And then James's warm rumble underneath it. Kai pressed his fist against the window frame. "All right," he said. "Stay the course, son. I promise you." He hung up. He stood there for a moment. Then he went downstairs, and James had lost the breakfast argument entirely, and was now making both pancakes and eggs, with the dignity of a man reframing defeat as generosity. Zaya was on the kitchen counter, eating the first pancake before it was technically finished. "There he is," she said. She held out a piece. "You look terrible. Eat." "I'm fine. Tiger." He took the piece of pancake. He ate it. James caught his eye over Zaya's head and gave him the specific look of a man who had also learned that it was simply easier to eat the pancake. The call came on a Tuesday morning. Kai was in the kitchen. James was at the table with his tea, talking about a business deal from 20 years ago that had gone badly. A London contract, a partnership that fell apart, a decision that had redirected the entire course of his life. He talked about it without bitterness, just the honest accounting of a man who had made peace with the things that had shaped him. Kai's phone buzzed on the table. Unknown. Encrypted. "Excuse me." He stepped outside into the cool morning. Answered. "We have information," the voice said. Level. Unhurried. "About James Martins and the night your parents died. Hard evidence, financial records, communication logs, a witness account. We'll send everything to this number. All we need is for you to act on it." "Who are you?" "People who want the same thing you want." The call ended. Files began downloading to his phone. Through the kitchen window, James at the table, both hands around his mug now, smiling at something on his phone. And Zaya, coming down the stairs in her oversized jumper, stealing her father's tea, laughing when he protested. James pulling her under his arm, her leaning into him. Just that. The ordinary, irreplaceable warmth of two people who loved each other. The files finished downloading. Kai stood with his back against the wall and looked at his phone, and did not move for a long time. He read them at 2 a.m. at the kitchen table with one lamp. They were convincing, built with the authority of documents assembled by people who knew what evidence needed to look like. Financial transfers with James Martin's name. A communication log. A witness account placing him at a meeting where decisions were made. One after another, they told a complete story. There was a gap. Small. A link in the chain that required more faith than the documents themselves could provide. A trained eye would catch it. Kai caught it. He sat with it for a long time. Then he called Victor. Victor answered on the third ring, warm and slightly rough with sleep, and immediately alert. "The files came?" Kai said. "Yes." "There's a gap in the evidence chain." "There is always a gap. That's why we've waited 19 years. For enough pieces to build around it." "Victor, who sent these?" "People I trust completely." "I need to know their names." "Kai." A pause. The gentleness settling in, deep and certain. "I raised you. I sat with you in the hospital when you were 14. I was at your graduation. I loved your parents and I watched what was done to them, and I have carried it every day since." His voice was even, unshakable. "This is right. I give you my word." Kai closed his eyes. Down the hall, faint and low, Zaya's music had stopped. She was asleep. He knew the sounds of this house now the way he knew his own heartbeat. He picked up his phone. He made the call. He had requested 2 plainclothes officers, a quiet arrest, handled with care for the subject's health and the family's dignity. He was specific. He was clear. What arrived at 7 in the morning was 6 vehicles and 12 armed officers in tactical gear. He heard the engines from the kitchen. He came to the hallway and stopped. James was already at the front door, because he walked toward things. Always, rather than waiting for them to arrive. He took the warrant from the officer who handed it to him. He read it. He stood very still. Then his eyes came up from the warrant and found Kai across the room. They looked at each other. Neither spoke. Something moved in James Martin's face. Not accusation. Not yet. Not with the full shape of things still unclear to him. But a careful, searching look. The look of a man who is holding a piece of a picture and trying to understand what the rest of it means. Footsteps on the stairs. Bare feet on the landing. Zaya came down in the oversized jumper she slept in, hair loose, moving fast the way you move when something in the sounds of a house is wrong. She saw the officers. She saw her father at the door. She looked across the room and saw Kai, standing to the side of the officers, in his operational clothes, in the position of someone who had known the vehicles were coming before they arrived. She didn't understand it yet. He could see that. The information in front of her, not yet assembled into its full shape. She was still in the last moment before it became clear, and he stood there and let it arrive, because there was nothing else to do. "Appa. It's all right, Butterfly." James's voice was completely steady. He looked at his daughter with everything he had and put it all in his face. All the love, all the reassurance, all of it. Then he looked at Kai one last time. Something settled in his eyes. Something that was not anger but carried more weight than anger. It was sorrow and understanding, and the expression of a man who thought he knew something and is now quietly, privately rearranging it. He allowed the officers to guide him out. The door closed. Silence. Zaya stood at the bottom of the stairs. She turned around. She looked at Kai. He looked back at her. "What just happened?" Her voice was careful. The voice of someone holding open the last possible moment for the thing they fear not to be true. He said nothing. She watched his face. She looked at how he was standing. She looked at his clothes and the position of his body relative to the door those officers had just used. And she watched the shape of everything she had not been allowed to see assemble itself in front of her. "What did you do?" No answer. She picked up her coat from the hook by the door. She opened it. She left. Kai stood in the empty hallway alone. Then he picked up his bag and walked out the door she had left open. He got in his car and sat with his hands on the steering wheel and did not start the engine for a long time. He would not go back to that house. He knew that. Whatever had just ended, it had ended completely. She came to his apartment the next morning. One knock. Hard. He opened it. Still in the same clothes he had on yesterday. Hadn't slept. He looked like a man standing at the bottom of something he had dug himself, measuring its depth for the first time. She stepped past him without waiting. And she had never seen this apartment. She looked around. One couch, one table, the corkboard on the wall with its photographs and red string and the face at the center of it. Her father's face. At the center of 19 years. She stood in front of it for a long moment. Then she turned around. "Tell me everything," she said. "Right now. All of it." He told her. Standing in the center of the room, he told her everything. The corkboard. His parents. The fire when he was 10 years old. The 19 years of building. The academy. The core. The program. Every step chosen because it led toward the circles where James Martin's moved. The assignment. Accepted with full knowledge of who she was. Every document quietly gathered. Every Sunday call. He told it cold and straight and complete. And because she deserved the truth, even when the truth was this, and it was the only clean thing he had left. She listened to all of it without a word. When he finished, she was quiet. The room was very still. "And me?" Her voice. Level. Patient. "Was I part of the plan?" He said nothing. "Kai." Still level. No performance of anger. Something colder than anger. "I am asking you a direct question." I used the proximity. The words came out measured and deliberate, the specific cruelty of a man choosing accuracy over mercy. I told myself what was between us was useful for... Her hand came across his face. Flat. Full force. He did not move, hands at his sides. He took it. Then her fists came against his chest, not trying to hurt him, just needing somewhere for the feeling to go. Again and again. And he stood there and took everyone because this was what he had earned, and he was not going to protect himself from it. He was not going to protect himself from any of it. She stopped. She was breathing hard. The tears she had refused to cry were in her eyes now, and she was not going to let them fall in front of him. "Everything," she said quietly. "Everything in that studio. Everything you said. Every single thing." She looked at him. "Was that the job too?" He met her eyes. "No," he said. "I don't believe you." "I know." A long silence. Her jaw was tight, her eyes very bright. "You sat at his table," she said. "You ate his food. He made you tea. He told you to get some sleep and he meant it. He trusted you with me." Her voice didn't break. She didn't let it break. "And none of that was enough." "No," he said. "It wasn't." She stared at him. "At least you're honest about it." "It's all I have left to give you. It's not enough." "I know that too." She walked to the door, opened it, closed it behind her, quietly. Not a slam, just a careful, deliberate final click. The sound of a door being closed by someone who has decided that it needs to stay closed. He sat down on the floor. She found out about the cancer in the prison visiting room. James took her hand across the table. He looked at her with the look of a man who had been deciding when to say something for 2 years and had simply run out of road. "There's something I should have told you a long time ago, Butterfly." "Appa." She was very still. "What is it?" "I'm sick." His voice was quiet. Even. "Blood cancer." "Yes, I've known for 2 years. The numbers haven't been good for a while." She stared at him. She could see it now. All the things she had been explaining away for months. The weight, the cough, the careful way he moved, the notes left in hidden places, the photographs rearranged. She had known. Some part of her had known, and she had looked directly at it and turned away because looking felt like making it real. 2 years, she said. "Appa, 2 years and you didn't... I didn't want you to stop living your life to watch over mine." That is not your decision to make. I know. He held her hand tighter. I know. I'm sorry, Butterfly. Don't. Her voice was thin now. Don't apologize. Just... She stopped. She pressed her eyes closed for a moment. How long? What did they say? They don't give me good numbers. That's not what I asked. James looked at their joined hands. They're cautious about timelines. The prison isn't... The conditions here aren't helping. He looked up at her. But Butterfly, none of that changes anything about right now. Right now I'm here, and you're here, and you're in prison, she said. Her voice broke on the last word, the first crack in all the composure she had been holding. You're in prison, and you're sick, and the man I thought... She stopped. James watched her. He told me he loved me, she said quietly. He said it without saying it. Every single day in that house. And the whole time, I know. She looked at her father, thin now, thinner than she had been willing to see. He and tired in the specific way of someone whose body is working too hard on too many things. And she sat there in that visiting room and held both impossible things at the same time. Her father was dying. The man she loved had put him here. Both true. Both hers. No way to hold them except all at once. 3 weeks after the arrest, Kai found what he had not been looking for. He had resigned from the Corps, working alone now, following the encrypted files back to their source, not building the case against James, dismantling it. 3 encryption shells. He followed each one to the next with the patience of a man who had nothing left to lose by being thorough. The company at the end of the 3rd shell had 1 registered owner. He sat with the name on his screen. Victor Kai. He pulled every thread. 19 years of architecture unraveling in a single evening. Not because the structure was wrong, but because the foundation underneath it was. His parents had not been killed on James Martin's order. They had been killed by a man who stood to gain their business assets. A man who had then watched, for years, as a contract dispute gave those same assets to James Martin's, which produced a perfect target, a perfect story, and a nephew full of grief and nowhere to aim it. His uncle had killed his parents, and then raised him with both hands and genuine love and called him son every day for 19 years, and used that love to point him at the wrong man. An innocent man. A sick man. Is a man he had sat across from at breakfast and watched pass the butter and listened to say, I just need her to be okay when I'm not here anymore. And that man was now in a prison cell with a body that had been fighting cancer for 2 years because of what Kai had done, because of what Victor had engineered him to do. Zaya's father. He stood up from the desk and knocked the chair back and put both hands flat on the wall and stood there breathing. His whole body was shaking. He had never shaken in his life. Not in sparring, not under pressure, not under anything. And his hands were shaking against the wall, and his jaw was locked, and his eyes were burning, and he stood there for a long time just trying to stay upright under the weight of it. Then he picked up his phone. He called Seo-jun. I need you to contact every resource you have, he said. His voice came out wrong, rough, not controlled, nothing like his voice. Emergency release, James Martin's. I'm filing the real evidence right now. I need to know the fastest possible route. A pause on the line. Kai. What happened? Just do it, please. The please came out cracked down the middle. I'll explain everything, just move. He gathered everything. The full trail. Victor's culpability, the fabricated evidence chain, every document. And drove to the police station and laid 19 years on a table and told a detective all of it, from the beginning. Fast and complete, and shaking the entire time in a way he could not stop. How long? He said when he finished, to authorize the release. The detective looked at the documents. 4 hours minimum. We'd need to verify. He's sick. Kai's voice cracked again. He has blood cancer. He has been in there for 3 weeks. How long? 4 hours minimum. I'm sorry, I can't. Kai was already out the door. He called Seojun again. Seojun called everyone he knew. 4 hours was 4 hours, no matter who you called. Kai drove toward the hospital anyway. Because James had been moved to the medical ward 2 days ago, a punch in the yard that had triggered something in an already failing body, and the lawyer had told him this morning, and Kai had been filing evidence since 6 a.m. trying to get him out before. He pushed the car faster through Seoul traffic and told himself 4 hours was 4 hours and he was almost there. He found Seojun in the hospital lobby. He saw his face from across the room and stopped walking. Seojun looked at him. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. His face said everything he needed to know. How long ago? Kai said. 40 minutes. The lobby kept going around him, people moving, a phone ringing somewhere. The specific, indifferent noise of a place that processes grief every single day and cannot afford to stop for any of it. James Martin's heart, stretched to its absolute limit by 2 years of cancer and 3 weeks of wrongful imprisonment, and a body that had simply been asked to carry too much for too long, had run out of what it needed. He had not been alone. It had not been violent. He had run out of road, exactly as he had said he would on the veranda that night, with the specific dignity of a man who had always walked toward things rather than waiting for them. Kai stood in the lobby, down the corridor, through the long glass panel that ran the length of the hall, a row of chairs outside a closed door. Zaya in one of them, hands in her lap, back straight, not crying. The specific stillness of someone who has had everything decided for them by something beyond any argument. He could not go to her. He had no right to go to her. He had been the one standing to the side of those officers. He had been the one who had sat at that table and eaten that food and listened to that laugh and done it anyway, and then raced across the city for 40 minutes trying to undo it, and been 40 minutes too late. He stood at the end of the corridor and looked at her through the glass. She felt it. She turned her head. They looked at each other across the distance. The glass, the corridor, in the full weight of everything that had happened between a storage room in the dark and this hallway in this hospital. Her face did not change. She looked at him the way you look at someone when there is nothing left to give them, not even anger. Just the hollow, exhausted recognition of what is simply and irrevocably true. She turned away. He left. He made it to the car park. He got in his car. He closed the door. And then the sound that came out of him was not anything he had ever made before, not in 19 years of discipline, not in 19 years of controlled, measured, deliberate everything. It came from somewhere below all of that, from the 10-year-old boy who had lost his parents and the 29-year-old man who had just lost everything else. A single raw broken sound that he pressed both fists against his mouth to try to contain and could not contain. He doubled forward in the driver's seat with his forehead almost on the steering wheel, and his whole body shaking, and he just broke. Completely. For the first time in 19 years, with no one to see it and nothing to perform for and nowhere left to put it, he broke all the way open. He sat there for a long time. The authorities arrived at Victor's house 2 hours after Kai had filed the evidence. Kai was already there. He had driven across the city with both hands on the wheel and nothing in his mind except the address and what he needed to say. And he was standing on the front path when the police vehicles pulled up behind him and the officers got out and looked at him, recognizing the man from the station, the one who had just submitted everything, and understood before any words were exchanged exactly what was happening here. Victor opened the front door himself. He looked at the officers. Then he looked at Kai standing on the path, and his face did something complicated, something that was not surprise, that had in it a long and exhausted resignation, and underneath that, undeniably and horribly, something that looked like anxiety or relief. The relief of a man who has been waiting for a particular knock for 19 years and is almost glad, though terrified, it has finally come. "Kai," he said. His voice was warm. Even now, that same warm, unhurried voice. "Let me—" Kai was already moving before he had finished. He crossed the path in 3 steps, and the officers moved at exactly the same moment. 2 of them catching his arms, 1 stepping between them. And Kai fought against it with the full contained fury of a man who had spent 19 years being controlled and had just watched that control produce the worst possible outcome, all of it coming out at once. He wasn't trying to be restrained. He wasn't performing anything. He was simply trying to reach the man in front of him with everything he had. "You killed them," he said. Not shouting. Something worse than shouting, the specific voice of a person saying a true thing that has just finished being abstract and become completely, irreversibly real. "You killed them, and you raised me, and you made me. You put me in that house. You made me do this to her." "Kai." Victor's voice was still even, still warm. The officers had positioned themselves between them, and Victor was looking at Kai across the gap with an expression of genuine, steady love, and Kai hated him for it. Hated him specifically and completely for being capable of that expression after everything. For the love being real when nothing else was. For there being no clean way to hold what Victor was, because he was both things completely, and neither of them canceled the other out. "He's dead," Kai said. His voice broke on the last word. "He's dead, and she has nothing, and you made me the reason for that. You made me the reason." "I know," Victor said quietly. "I know." The officers moved Victor toward the vehicle. He went without resistance, with the same unhurried ease he'd always had, as if he had always known this was coming and had simply been waiting in dread for Kai to find the thread. At the door of the vehicle, he looked back once. "I love you," he said. "That was always true." Kai stood on the path with both fists clenched and the officer's hands still on his arms, and he looked at the man who had been the only constant in his life for 19 years and felt the love and the fury and the grief all sitting in the same place at once, and none of them made room for the others, and all of them were real. The vehicle door closed. Kai stood on the empty path alone, fighting all the emotions swirling within him and having nowhere to let it out. He attended the burial from a distance. He did not have the right to be there. Not in the row of seats, not in her line of sight, not anywhere near the grief he had accelerated. He stood behind a row of trees at the far edge of the cemetery in a dark coat and watched from a distance that felt, in all its inadequacy, like the only honest thing he could offer. She stood at the graveside in a white dress and a black coat, holding herself with a dignity that was its own kind of grief. Afterward, when everyone else had moved away, she put her hand flat on her father's headstone and closed her eyes for a long time. He watched her from the distance. He drove home. 2 days later, he went to the house. He told himself he needed to collect the last of his things from the guest room. He drove there, parked, sat outside for a while, then went in, packed quickly, carried his bag to the front door. He stood in the hallway. The studio door was open. Against the large canvas on the easel, 2 figures, a tiger turned slightly away, a fox with one paw reaching toward him. She had shown it to him once, stood beside him while he looked at it, and said, "I can tell there's something you're not saying to me, but whatever it is, you can tell me. I'm not going anywhere." He looked at it for a long time, then he picked up his bag and walked out and pulled the door shut behind him. He knocked on the neighbor's door, the property manager, an older woman who recognized him, who looked at him with the careful expression of someone delivering news they hadn't asked for. "The young woman," she said. "She left yesterday morning. A bag. She didn't say where she was going." She looked at him steadily. She left a key and a forwarding address for post. That was all. Kai stood on the front step of an empty house. He looked at the door, at the dark windows, at the reading chair on the veranda that no one would sit in now. She was gone. Not in the way of someone who needed time and would come back. In the way of someone who had made a decision with complete intention, packed exactly what she needed, and left nothing behind for him, because he had not earned a single word left behind for him. He went back to his apartment. He sat in front of the corkboard, the red string and the photographs and the face at the center of 19 years that was no longer there because he had taken it down with his own hands. The board was half empty now. It looked like what it was. The architecture of a mission that was over, that had produced nothing except damage. He reached up, and he pulled every remaining pin from the board. He took the whole thing down from the wall. He sat on the floor of his apartment in the quiet and held the corkboard across his knees and thought about a man in a gray sweater who had passed him the butter because he had noticed on day 3 that Kai always reached for it. He sat there for a very long time. Outside, Seoul was loud and indifferent, and entirely uninterested in what had just happened in one apartment on the south side of it. Inside, it was very quiet. Zaya Martins was somewhere in the world, and she had every reason and every right to never let him find her. She's gone. The house is empty. The corkboard is still on his wall. The man at the center of it is dead, and the woman he loves has disappeared completely. Drop a comment right now. Tell me, after everything you just watched him do, is there any version of this where you forgive him? Any version at all? Because I need to know who's in this with me. Like this video. Subscribe. Hit that bell. Part 3 is coming, and it is going to cost everyone everything before it gives anything back. We will see you there.